Hello. Today's session is about world cuisines. Obviously, we won't be able to cover every kind of cuisine today, especially if we're going to do a video demonstration, but we can talk a bit about different kinds of cuisines, what you might think about if you're going to try something new. And after we talk about some things to think about, we're going to make a couple of dishes together. So if you're trying to pick a new dish to try, a new kind of cuisine, you should really think about what kinds of foods do you like. Think about the kinds of ingredients. Certain cultures are more apt to have a lot of vegetables. Others have quite a lot of seafood, for example, Japan and Hong Kong. If you're not a fan of seafood, it doesn't mean you can't look at recipes from those cultures, but those are places to go certainly if you're looking for seafood dishes. Any culture that is along the ocean or a sea is going to have a lot of seafood probably. And then think about what kinds of carbs and grains you like. If you don't like quinoa, for example, avoid dishes that call for that kind of grain and maybe find something that calls for rice or pasta. Also think about the kinds of flavors. We'll spend a few minutes talking about this because flavors can really make a difference. You might like a cauliflower dish from one culture but not care for it at all from another culture. I don't personally like plain steamed or boiled or roasted cauliflower, but in a curry or a nice spicy stew, I find it really flavorful and tasty. So these kinds of things are things to think about. What kinds of seasonings do you like? Because if you don't like the seasonings, you're probably not going to like the food. What kinds of condiments do you like, and what's in those condiments? Take a look at labels and think about it. And those kinds of ingredients, especially the ones at the top of the list that are the most prominent in those condiments or spice blends, are going to be probably spices that you'll like in a dish. So think about that when you're picking recipes. Anything that has a very large amount of something you don't care for, or if it has a particular flavor as its primary flavor, you might want to think about avoiding that if you don't care for that particular flavor. For example, I'm not a huge fan of clove, so I'm not going to choose a dish or a spice blend that calls for clove as one of its primary ingredients. I like to have clove in something if there are a number of different seasonings and I can reduce the amount of clove in the dish. Another thing to think about is what regions and what cultures to look for. If you like lightly seasoned foods, some cultures might be more likely to have those. That having been said, most cultures do have lightly seasoned foods and others will have those that have a bit more heavily seasoned flavors to them. But some that you might look toward if you like some lightly seasoned food are Latin America, Europe, some African cuisine, and some East Asian cuisine. But that having been said, Latin America and Africa do have some spicier foods, and so do the Middle East, Central Asia, and East Asia. And then another thing to think about is that foods can vary by region. A large country like the United States, India, or China can have very different flavors in different parts of the country. The Southwest is known for its particular flavors and flair of dishes, which is different than what the Southeast is known for in the United States. Likewise, in China, Sichuan and Hunan are two types of foods that are based in provinces and that are known for being particularly hot and spicy, but other types of dishes from other parts of China can be milder and more lightly seasoned. Same goes for India. We're going to talk about some dishes from North India, which have a very different flavor sometimes to South India. And we're going to see today, even among the three dishes we're going to talk about from North India, one is fairly lightly seasoned, and the other two have a bit more complex flavor to them. Also, with cuisines being regional, you might find that in those regions where more than one culture is in a small area, that if you like food from one country, you might like to try food from another. The Mediterranean has some mutual influence, for example, and you'll find that they might have similarities in some of their seasonings, and the food from Morocco might have its own particular twist on things. But if you go to Tunisia or to Egypt or to Turkey or Greece, you're going to find sometimes some similar kinds of dishes, but just slightly differently seasoned. One of the main things, other than just knowing what kinds of main ingredient foods you like, such as vegetables, meats, and seafoods, one of the main things to think about is spices. It's important to know what kinds of spices you like so that you can pick dishes that don't have too much of a spice that you don't like. It's always great to try things, and sometimes it's a matter of developing taste for something, but if you know that you really don't care for a particular spice, for me, clove, for example, I'm always going to reduce the clove in a recipe. Some people don't care for other kinds of seasonings like cumin, for example. And if that's the case, you can always reduce the cumin or potentially omit it if there are a number of different seasonings to make a dish. If a dish is depending on really one seasoning to give it flavor, and you take it out, then you're not going to have a very flavorful dish. But if most of what's in the dish that gives it flavor is things that you like, it's not a huge deal to omit chilies if you don't like hot dishes, or to omit dill if you're not a fan of dill. So think about these things. Some things to know, for example, what kinds of things, sometimes spices don't necessarily have a very strong flavor to them, but if you don't like certain flavors, for example, anise is something that goes a long way for me, and fennel seeds also have a bit of an anise flavor to them. If you smell, these are fennel seeds, which you'll often find in Indian dishes. I like them in Indian dishes, but the dishes I cook them in usually have a bunch of seasonings in them, and the fennel is just a small amount. It's not the primary seasoning in the dish. So think about that. What kinds of things do you like in general? Don't be afraid to smell your spices and get a sense of whether or not it smells good, right? Because smell influences flavor. So if it smells strong and it turns you off, a little is going to go a very long way for you. Another example of that might be cumin and coriander are two spices you find often in Indian dishes, and if you smell the two of them, you're going to find that coriander has a much lighter kind of sweet smell to it, whereas if you smell the cumin, it's got a much stronger smell to it. A lot of the dishes, including ones that we're going to look at today, have equal parts cumin and coriander, and even maybe just a little more cumin because you sometimes cook cumin seeds, but then also add equal parts dry cumin and dry coriander. If cumin is a bit strong for you, you can reduce or omit those, and we'll talk about that a little bit when we look at these dishes. Whereas the coriander, it's a little bit sweeter. They do complement each other, but if you're not a fan of the smell of cumin, think about reducing it so that the flavor of it doesn't turn you off on a dish that you're trying for the first time. And the other one to think about with Indian dishes is turmeric. It's very popular in Indian dishes and is popular now too in general as a supplement. I'm not recommending taking one, but some people say that it has health benefits. If you smell it though, it's not as strong as cumin to a certain extent, although it has a much more distinct, I think, aroma to it. So smell it and see if you like it. You can always reduce it. Usually there's less turmeric in an Indian dish than cumin, so you probably don't have to worry about it as much, but you can always reduce it a little bit if it smells a bit strong to you. One last thing, some recipes call for spice blends, and sometimes you can buy spice blends that are mild, medium, or hot varieties. Pick one that suits your taste, but not always, they're not always labeled. So you might also just take a look at the ingredients, The ones at the top of the list are going to be the ones that are the most prominent. So if there's something at the top of the list that you don't care for, maybe try to find another spice blend. You can make your own and reduce the amounts of spices that you don't like as much. I do that with Chinese 5-spice powder. There's often too much clove in those spices, those spice blends to suit my taste. So I just make my own, and I put a little less clove in it than most of the recipes would call for. Also think about chilies. If you don't care for very hot dishes, choose varieties of chili powder that have milder versions of chilies, or that have chilies way at the bottom of the list. The farther down the list and the less, and the milder the chili pepper, the less heat there's going to be in a chili powder, for example. And then one last thing before we actually take a look at some recipes together. If you're just getting started on trying a new cuisine, you'll probably want to try to find something that's relatively easy. So read through the steps and make sure it's not too complicated. And then also check the ingredients to see how easy it is to get them. If you have to go all over the place, sometimes Central PA is not the easiest place to find specific ingredients that are not common. Maybe try something else, or see if you can do a substitution. Sometimes substitutions are possible. Just don't make it too hard on yourself unless you really just enjoy the challenge of trying to find new ingredients. Other thing to think about, we're talking about easy and healthy world cuisines today. Oftentimes it's fairly easy to find world cuisines that are relatively healthy. Other cultures tend to eat more vegetables and more legumes like beans and peas and lentils than the United States does. So those already are going to give you more fiber in your meals. But you can also then, especially if you're eating something with legumes that offer some protein, you can reduce your meat and your seafood, which are going to give you protein, but also saturated fat. Also look for recipes with whole grains and substitute brown rice instead of white if you don't mind eating it. Brown rice just is higher in fiber and is a bit more nutritious for you. And then anything that is a prepared condiment or stock or anything like that, choose low sodium and low fat options for those kinds of ingredients. So today we're going to make several North Indian dishes. As you'll see as we go through these dishes, the spicy grilled chicken, despite being called a spicy grilled chicken, is not really all that spicy. The kidney bean curry and the dry spiced potatoes and cauliflower have more complex flavors, more kinds of spices in them. So you're already going to see that within the corpus of North Indian dishes, you're going to have a variety of different flavors. One of the reasons I picked these dishes today is that it does offer us a mild chicken that you can make that people might like, even if they're not a huge fan of curries. And then the potatoes and cauliflower dish and the kidney bean curry both have chili powder in them, which are a familiar flavor for most people who are familiar with American and Tex-Mex kinds of cuisines. So there will be something familiar to you, but at the same time it'll have an Indian flair to it with the curry spices. So this is the spicy grilled chicken. If you are going to make it and make all three of these dishes to cook at some point, either today or another time, you might want to do this first because the chicken marinades. We are not going to make this today, in part because our household doesn't eat meat anymore, although I have made this dish, so I can testify to the fact that even my dad, who isn't necessarily a fan of Indian food, liked this chicken. We made it on the grill. And because you get brown sugar and honey in the marinade, along with a couple of different kinds of chili peppers, it isn't a very spicy chicken because the sweetness of the honey and brown sugar balance out and temper the chilies. You can also reduce the amount of chili in your in your marinade if you don't like it. I wouldn't recommend removing both kinds of chilies completely, because then you're just going to have a very sweet kind of chicken. But you could certainly cut the crushed red chilies in half and even omit the fresh chili if you don't want to bother with it. But this is easy, so we're not going to worry about making it. You can make it yourself, get the chicken marinating, and then you'll have plenty of time to work on either or both of the other two dishes. And then once the chicken has marinated, you can grill it and eat one or more of these dishes for a meal. So the first dish that we are going to make today is dry spiced potatoes and cauliflower. If you're going to make this with us, you'll want to prepare several things. You'll want to get your potatoes washed and peeled and cut into bite-sized pieces. And with your cauliflower, you'll want to wash it and also chop it into bite-sized pieces. If you like your cauliflower very tender, then I would also recommend, because you're going to parboil your potatoes for about 8 to 10 minutes. So you might parboil the cauliflower right in with the potatoes if you like your cauliflower tender. If you like it a little bit crispy, a little bit firmer, more like an al dente, then you can just follow the recipe to the letter and put it in by itself to cook. It will remain somewhat al dente though, unless you parboil it. Or you can do what I'm going to do, and that is to use some frozen cauliflower. And if that's the case, you don't really need to do anything to prep the cauliflower except to measure it. I would recommend that you get everything ready to go. I have already parboiled the potatoes and I have the cauliflower ready. I have measured out all of my spices and other ingredients. So you can get these things ready to go and then and pause the video while you're doing that. A couple of things to note before that happens. Notice that I've put 3 ingredients in red, cumin seeds and actually, I should have highlighted the ground cumin instead of the ground coriander. Notice that cumin shows up twice. You could omit one or both of those, or you could cut them in half, since we've talked about cumin being a relatively sharp spice. And the same goes for the turmeric, as we've talked about earlier in this video. You might either reduce it or omit it. You're still going to have plenty of flavor in this because you've got chili powder, coriander, and green chili if you choose to put one in. Definitely seed and chop it if you don't like hot chilies, because the seeds are going to make it hotter. And then if you have some chopped fresh cilantro as a garnish, that would be an option, but not everybody likes cilantro, so you definitely don't need to worry about it. So I would recommend that you go ahead and pause this video and get these ingredients ready to go, and then we will come back together and work on cooking. Okay, so if you have everything ready to go, I am heating up the oil in a large pot. You want to heat it to about medium, and then once it gets to medium, you're going to want to fry your cumin seeds for about 2 minutes. Make sure that you stir them the whole time. And then once those have cooked for a couple of minutes, you'll add your chili if you're cooking it, and you're going to fry for another minute. So go ahead and do that. Okay, so my cumin seeds and my chili have both fried for several minutes. You don't want anything to get too browned or scorched, so do keep the oil at a medium level. Now, if you are adding the cauliflower raw, you're going to want to go ahead and add that right now, and you're going to want to cook for 5 minutes. We're using frozen cauliflower, and our potatoes are parboiled. So if you are going to cook your cauliflower right now because you're adding it raw, just go ahead and pause the video again and just keep stirring it for about 5 minutes. Once the cauliflower has cooked for 5 minutes, or if you're using parboiled or frozen cauliflower, you can go ahead and add the potatoes and your parboiled cauliflower along with your ground spices and salt. So go ahead and do that. Okay, if you have added your cauliflower, your potatoes, and your spices and your salt, just keep stirring it occasionally for about 7 to 10 minutes. You might keep it covered while it's cooking. Basically, it's just going to cook now until the potatoes and cauliflower are both tender. And then if you'd like, when you serve it, you can garnish it with some cilantro. I have put a lid on my cauliflower and my sweet potatoes, and I am going to reduce the heat to low once they are fully cooked, because next we're going to make the other curry, and I would like for these to stay warm until I am ready to eat. You should be able to smell the spices now. One thing to note is that frying spices in oil or even dry toasting them in a pan is going to help to release the flavor of those spices. So anything that you got a whiff of when you smelled them in the bottle, it's going to even become a bit stronger now because the heat releases the flavor of those spices. So go ahead and let those cook and turn it back when the potatoes and the cauliflower are fully cooked and to your liking as far as tenderness is concerned. And that dish will be ready to go. If you're going to serve this as a full meal, you might also cook some rice to have along the side. It's obviously not necessary if you're trying to be healthy. Potatoes and cauliflower are certainly enough of a starch already, but you could serve it with some rice along with the chicken if you're making it, and the kidney bean curry, which is actually a vegan option for a protein if you don't like to eat meat, or if you're trying to reduce the amount of meat in your diet, you could eat the kidney bean curry instead of a meat, or you can reduce the amount of meat that you eat and have some kidney bean curry and the cauliflower and potatoes. The reason I've chosen this recipe, this is one of my personal favorites. It has I like to call it a kind of Indian style chili, because it's kidney beans and tomatoes as the ingredient base, and then notice we're going to use chili powder again and add some of the curry spices to give it an Indian flair. One thing to note is that if you ever want to do a one dish meal, I have done this when I felt like being lazy. I've either reduced the amount of kidney beans to a cup and then added a cup of cooked cauliflower, or you could add 2 cups of chopped leafy greens. You could also just add maybe a cup of chopped leafy greens and keep the full amount of kidney beans in the recipe if you wanted to make this more vegetable based than just a kidney bean dish. Another reason that I chose this recipe is that the cauliflower and potato dish you would be able to find at Indian restaurants around central PA. I haven't personally found this dish looking at menus of the Indian restaurants around this area. So this is maybe one to try, and if there are certain seasonings in it that you want to reduce because you don't care for them as much, you could always increase the chili powder a little bit and reduce some of the curry seasonings to make a nice kidney bean curry to eat with the chicken and the cauliflower and sweet potatoes. So I would once again recommend that you get everything ready to go. You'll want to pause the video while you do that, get your spices ready to go. You'll want 2 cups of kidney beans. You can either cook those yourself or you can use a can of kidney beans. That's what I'll be doing today. And you'll want a can of tomatoes, and then measure out those spices. Also chop up an onion Chop up a green chili if you'd like, and mince up some garlic and some ginger. A tip on the curry paste. I have some curry paste that I have pre-made. You can buy curry paste in the store. That is perfectly fine if you find one that you want to use, or if you have some already. Another option, if you can't find curry paste, is if you have some dry curry powder. You can mix equal parts curry powder, water, and whatever oil you prefer to use, probably something like olive oil or a vegetable oil like sunflower oil, maybe not coconut oil. It's going to give it a different kind of flavor. And also coconut oil has more saturated fat than other oils. So you can just mix to get your two tablespoons of curry paste, basically 2/3 of a tablespoon of oil, 2/3 of a tablespoon of curry powder, and 2/3 of a tablespoon of water. Stir it together in a small bowl, and you'll have a curry paste ready to go. Whatever you prefer. I'm using one that I've pre-made, using that kind of mixture, or use one that you've found in the store. So go ahead and get your ingredients ready to go, and we're going to heat up the oil in our pot so that we can start by sauteing, or by frying the cumin seeds and then sauteing the onion along with the chili, garlic, and ginger. So pause the recording now if you want to get these things ready to go, and come back when you've done that. So we've fried our cumin seeds here for a minute, and I've just added the onion. So now I'm just going to let that saute for about 3 to 4 minutes until the onion gets tender. And then I'm going to add the green chili and the garlic and ginger, and just saute for another minute or two. You want the onion to get tender, but the rest of the ingredients you just want to cook a little bit, enough that the flavors are released. You don't want to caramelize these fresh seasonings. So go ahead and do that, and when you are ready and those things are cooked, go ahead and add your 2 tablespoons of curry paste. You could reduce that as well. Curry paste has cumin in it already, as you might have seen if you looked at the ingredients. It probably has turmeric also, depending on what kind of curry powder you've bought. And it often has curry leaves. Curry leaves themselves are not a very strong ingredient. It would be more the cumin that you might want to think about, and depending on how hot it is. So you could reduce your curry paste and then increase your chili powder if you know that you like chili powder more, and make that a more prominent ingredient. But if you want to get a more traditional flavor, you can follow the ingredients here. So come back when we are ready to add our curry paste and our dry spices. Okay, the onion and the garlic, ginger, and chili are cooked now. So I've just added the curry paste and the dry spices. And I've actually covered it to let them cook for 5 minutes. You do want to let that happen because, as I said with the previous dish, and I'll say it again in case you skipped past that because you didn't want to make the cauliflower and potato dish, this is going to really help to release the flavor of the spices. The heat from toasting or from sauteing, or even just from putting something in a stock and cooking it in a soup, that heat helps to release the flavor of those spices. So do let it cook. Covering can help, especially if you're adding dry spices. In this case, because the curry paste is going in too, it's a little bit better, but I do find sometimes just adding dry spices and cooking them, it can kind of get into your sinuses. So you might just cover the pot while that's happening. It helps to keep the moisture from the oil and the onion and fresh ingredients. And it also helps to prevent too much of the stronger aroma of the spices getting up into the air and maybe irritating your sinuses. So once you're done letting those cook for 5 minutes, you can go ahead and add the tomatoes and let it cook for another 5. That's what we're going to do right now. Okay, I have just added the tomatoes and I've set my stovetop timer for another 5 minutes. Do let the tomatoes cook with the spices for 5 minutes. Tomatoes are one of those foods that are great at absorbing flavors. So if you like the flavors in a particular kind of dish like this, then having tomatoes in it is just a fantastic way to really help to enjoy the flavor. Cauliflower is great at absorbing the spices as well. I love cauliflower in spicy dishes. I don't really care for it just plain, but I love it in these kinds of dishes. It just soaks up the flavor. And a dish that has cauliflower and tomatoes in it with curry seasonings is just, for me, the epitome of flavor. So that's one of the reasons this is one of my favorite dishes. That and this particular combination, this North Indian combination of seasonings, I think it has a nice balance of sweetness and spice. And if you don't like the super hot flavors, again, you can reduce the cumin seeds, you can reduce the curry paste, you can omit the chili altogether. If you don't care for ginger, you can reduce that as well. Ginger is somewhat sharper than garlic. So, don't be afraid to play around with it because, like I said, there's a lot of flavor in these dishes, so you're still going to have a very flavorful dish, even if you reduce or omit some of these spices. Okay, so let your tomatoes cook and come back when they've cooked for 5 minutes, and you can go ahead and add your beans. Okay, I have just added the kidney beans, and you can go ahead and do that. And if you're going to add some cilantro, add that now and just go ahead and cook everything. You can cover it if you'd like, especially if you're letting this and maybe the potato dish sit on the stove for a while. Once this is cooked for a little bit, you can turn it back to low like you might do with the potato and cauliflower dish, and you can get the meat ready. It's probably about time for the meat to come out from the marinade and go either into a broiler in the oven or maybe onto a grill. And if you want, you can cook some rice, or you can just consider the potato and cauliflower dish enough of a starch for this meal. But rice is usually served with Indian dishes. You can also get some naan. Naan is not something that I would recommend making at home because you really need that hot clay oven that gets really hot to make good naan. But you could get some from the restaurant or get the kind in the grocery store that you just toast lightly. It's pretty good. And serve this and you've got quite a meal. I am going to eat the kidney bean curry with the cauliflower and the potato dish. I'm skipping the meat, but you could do the meat instead, or you can eat a little less meat and eat some of this to get some protein. So hopefully if you've got everything simmering and ready to go, we can just finish up and talk about a couple of final things, just some reminders of some things that we've talked about today. I hope that you like these dishes if you've decided to try them. They do have that, the chicken is a lightly seasoned dish, not super spicy, even though it's called a spicy grilled chicken. And these two dishes with the vegetables and the beans both have chili powder in them, which you can always increase if you want to decrease some of the other curry spices, just to give it a try and see what you think about it, and maybe help you to start to develop a taste for some of these spices if you haven't had them before. You might also find, if you haven't liked other recipes, like I said, different regions of India have different kinds of flavored cuisines, and even within a particular region, like we've seen, that chicken isn't very spicy, but these two vegetable and bean dishes have very complex curry flavors to them. So Think about your spices. If you aren't sure about them, do like we've recommended today. Add less than the recipe calls for and give it a taste. If you want, you can always add a little bit more. Reduce those strong spices and hot chilies, especially if those are things you don't care for, or if there are people in your family who don't care for certain spices, you can always leave out the chilies and put the crushed chili peppers or a hot sauce on the side for a garnish. And then everybody will be satisfied. And then, yeah, just pay attention to the list of ingredients on spice blends and condiments as well, right? If you see things that you don't care for that are at the top of the list, maybe either omit it if it's not a main ingredient or try to find a different variety. And again, what we said earlier, if you're just trying something for the first time, pick recipes that are simple. Over time, more complicated recipes will become easier as you become familiar with the styles of different cultures. And also remember that if you like cuisine from a particular country, a neighboring country might have some similar kinds of dishes and flavors. But then at the same time, very large countries like India and China might have very different flavors between different regions. So be on the lookout for that as well. Take a look at the ingredients. That's going to be what's going to tell you what it's going to taste like. And if you compare two dishes and see that they have very different seasonings in them or very different amounts of seasonings, then the flavors are probably going to be different. So that's everything for this video, and I hope that it's been helpful, and I hope to see you for our next food video.